When the conversation turns to what is lacking in society today, we find that scarcely anyone is without something truly significant to contribute, something arising from their own unique place in life. Yet, my purpose here is not to draw up a mere list of all the deficiencies a survey might reveal. Rather, it is to direct our attention to the deeper currents, the subtle antecedents of a phenomenon that has, quite understandably, drawn comment from many sides and led a large part of humanity into a mood of profound pessimism, a sense of hopelessness that seems almost endless. One of the most extreme expressions of this despair came from a man from whom it might least have been expected, a man of a time when such thoughts were rare, even shocking. In one of his final works, the influential art historian Hammond Grimm, who passed before witnessing the most terrible war in human history, dying instead at the turn of the century, made this remarkable observation. When we survey the life of nations today and look deeply with the eye of the soul at how the peoples of the civilized world relate to one another, at how they clash, and at the seeds of future conflicts they carry within, then we feel almost ready to set a date for mass despair, for we cannot see where all this strife, all this tension and combat will lead, if not to the ultimate collapse of civilization. This statement is striking precisely because it comes from Grimm, for his worldview was, by nature, a joyous one. Throughout his life, he kept his gaze fixed on what elevates humanity, on the forces within man that are creative, productive, and life-affirming. And yet his words did not spring from the gloom that would later descend with the Great War. They arose purely from the spirit of the 19th century, at the very end of that century, before the storms of the 20th. Nothing that has happened since has lessened the weight of his words for us. And still, humanity must never surrender to hopelessness. Our task is not to dwell in despair, but to remain watchful for what might bring renewal, for what might inspire reconstruction, for what might herald a new dawn. To do this, we must look more deeply into the roots of the extraordinarily difficult situation that has gradually taken hold within European civilization. Even if we attribute these causes only to the economic sphere, we must still seek the spiritual life of modern civilization as the primary source underlying this decline. As I have noted in these lectures, our present disposition of soul, together with the soul forces available to us, is shaped by historical currents. To truly understand them, we must journey far back into the unfolding story of humanity itself. Specifically, we can see that at the threshold of Western spiritual life, there stands a figure whose vision bridges worlds. One eye gazing toward Asia, the other already toward the horizons of Europe. I speak of Plato. When we examine Plato's social theories, they can seem remarkably foreign to the modern mind. He envisions an ideal society, a community crafted even at the expense of individual human development. He contemplates without hesitation that children deemed unfit for life might simply be abandoned so as not to disrupt the social organism. He imagines a society in which full citizenship is reserved for a select class, while slavery is natural and unquestioned. Those engaged in trade or commerce occupy only a precarious place within his vision, and those who do not belong to this predetermined fabric are never fully accepted into the social whole. Much more could be said about Plato's ideal and how it relates to the individual human being. From the perspective of modern consciousness, we must admit that understanding of human individuality was still in its infancy. Attention was directed entirely to the community, which was seen as primary. The individual, the person who would live within it, was regarded as secondary. Their life, their very existence, was considered justified only to the extent that it aligned with the social ideal that existed beyond their own personality. To understand how Plato arrived at this concept of community, we must once again turn our gaze to Oriental civilization. And in doing so, we begin to see how the spiritual life of Europe resembles a small peninsula jutting out from a vast continent. In Asia, the idea of community was primary. Plato, in many ways, simply inherited this vision from the East. Yet to illuminate the global character of social life, we must examine the fundamental nature of the spiritual life of the Orient. There, humanity was of a type very different from the Europeans who would follow. In matters of soul and spirit, Asia manifested a civilization of extraordinary refinement, a civilization to which many Europeans would later feel drawn. We have all heard the oft-repeated words, "Light comes from the East." And yet, what these peoples of another type lacked was the deep awareness of self that has characterized Europeans since they began to develop civilization upon the earth. In Asia, one finds a subdued sense of self. Personality rests quietly in the depths of the soul. The European consciousness of individuality was not yet present there. If an individual, lacking this sense of self, were to adopt the high culture of the East, they would experience it as one experiences a dream, immersed in its beauty, yet without a full sense of personal ownership, without a true awareness of their own being. In ages when individuality had not yet fully matured, communities were more receptive to culture than were isolated individuals. Within communal life, human capacities to absorb and integrate civilization grew not simply in arithmetic steps, but in a geometrical, exponential unfolding. As this high civilization of the East gradually passed into Europe, it was distilled by European minds into a simple, enduring formula, the Apollonian dictum, "Know thyself." We may see the ancient Orient, in a sense, as developing toward this realization in Greece, the culmination of a selfless civilization that sought the perfection of the human spirit. Yet even in the East, it was recognized that for higher development, one must penetrate to the self. Spiritually, this is expressed through practices such as yoga. Socially, it manifests in the common structures of leadership and the organization of the masses. Everywhere we look in early Oriental civilization, the teacher and the leader was never merely a guide. They were at once priest, healer, and spiritual mentor. In the East, knowledge and spirituality were inseparable from the art of healing. The doctor could not be separated from the teacher, nor from the priest. To educate a person spiritually was to heal them, for man, in his natural state, was seen as incomplete, in need of guidance, of restoration, of transformation. This is deeply connected with the prevailing sense of universal human guilt that shaped early Eastern thought. Every effort toward higher knowledge, every step along the path of spiritual development, was itself an act of healing, a remedy for what nature had left unfinished in man. Connected with this was the mystery culture of the Orient. Within institutions that combined what we might now call church, school, and source of social inspiration, the goal was the development of the individual toward a higher spiritual life. Religion, art, and science were never separate here. Through ritual, the individual became a religious being, not by memorizing doctrines, not by clinging to articles of faith, but by participating in socially organized rites. Through sacrifice, through action. Yet even these rituals carried an aesthetic dimension. Through the combined experience of art, religion, and knowledge, the student of higher life did not merely acquire wisdom, they were transformed. A rebirth of the human being took place within them. The preparation for this transformation required a conscious experience of death, a symbolic death, setting the student apart from ordinary life. Having left behind all attachments to the world of the senses, they would emerge reborn, experiencing the spiritual world in its fullness. This was the ancient form of catharsis, the purification of man. From the old, earthly passions, desires, and emotions, a new human being arose, one purified, one ready to engage the world with a renewed soul. Only the reborn could exert true influence on their fellow human beings. Even modern scholarship recognizes this. The remnants of these mystery traditions have had a profound effect on social life, and those who underwent this inner transformation carried their impulses into the wider world with extraordinary impact. In the East, the aim was to heal man through knowledge, through spiritual education. This ancient wisdom passed to Greece, and from Greece in transformed ways to Europe, shaping European spiritual life, culture, and civilization. Consider Greek tragedy, so central to Western art. Aristotle is often quoted saying the aim of tragedy is to arouse fear and pity, so that through these emotions a purification, a catharsis occurs. But when we view Aristotle through the lens of Eastern spiritual understanding, we see more. Fear and pity are not merely aesthetic tools, they are vehicles for transformation of the soul. Through tragedy, the spectator enters the life of another, experiencing their sorrow, their pain, their joy, and in this communion, the soul escapes the narrow confines of its own existence, venturing vicariously beyond the self, touching the life of humanity itself. That fear, the fear that arises when a human being is confronted with something beyond himself, something that strips away the familiar, leaving him powerless, breathless. Aristotle, in speaking of tragedy, is describing precisely this experience. In witnessing tragedy, man is drawn into a world of feeling that carries him beyond himself, overwhelms him with fear, and yet, through this very confrontation, a purification, a catharsis, occurs. In this way, man learns to bear what, in his natural state, he cannot endure. Through this cleansing of the soul, he gains strength for the sympathetic experience of another's sorrow, another's joy. He becomes capable of stepping outside himself without being undone by fear. He emerges stronger, rooted in himself, prepared for the wider life of society. Aristotle, in assigning this function to tragedy, shows that art is not merely decoration or amusement. It educates, strengthens, and deepens the inner security of the soul. I am aware that to speak of art in this way may seem to some a diminishment of its purity, as if attributing to it some utilitarian purpose. Yet such objections often reveal a subtle Philistinism, the belief that integrating art into the fullness of human experience reduces it to mere utility. For the Greeks it was not so. Art was never subordinated to utility. It was included in life as a force that lifts man above himself, drawing him toward fuller consciousness, not merely satisfying practical needs. If we can look beyond the utilitarian mindset that dominates our modern world, we can begin to see the true significance of Greek art. Tragedy, alongside its aesthetic beauty, was a mirror in which man confronted himself, drawn from half-conscious perception toward complete self-awareness. In the social sphere, tragedy served the same ideal. Man, know thyself. If we extend this vision of art into society, and then reflect once more on the Orient, we see that in the mystery traditions, the therapeutic rebirth of man was intended to awaken individuality, to cultivate a sense of self where none had yet fully developed. For ancient society, the experience of self was not assumed. It was a social responsibility to foster the emergence of selfhood in those destined to lead. Only then could individuality harmonize with the life of the community. This perspective sheds light on Plato's ideal state, where the growth of individuality is permitted only through rebirth, through the guidance and wisdom accessible in that era. Humanity of that time had not yet known the full claims of individuality. What emerged in Asia was carried into Europe, amalgamated with Christianity, and persisted through the Middle Ages. Yet this continuity was shaped by the nature of the northern and central European tribes who moved into southern Europe. These peoples were endowed with a strong sense of self. Though living in communities, they strove to incorporate into their own being the knowledge and social wisdom they encountered. Through this blending, the contrast between community and individual life emerged. Individuality, in its full form, appeared only gradually, assisted by human institutions, always intertwined with the social fabric, its growth organic, inseparable from the collective experience. Looking back once more at the features of Oriental Greek civilization, even to Plato, we are today acutely aware that this entire civilization was built upon slavery, upon the subjugation of vast numbers of people. Much has been said about the significance of slavery in earlier times, and if we examine it carefully, we will indeed find much that is noteworthy, even profound. Yet the point most relevant to us today, and one that has received surprisingly little attention, concerns the role of human labor in the social order. In the Greek understanding, labor was largely invisible, unrealized in the ideal image of man. When we speak of the dignity of Oriental Greek man, the authority he embodied, we are speaking of a construction that rose above the heads of the masses, the very people who performed the essential work. The masses were, in effect, appendages of the social system, for labor itself was regarded as something given by nature, separate from the higher workings of society. Human society, it seemed, truly began only where labor left off. At a higher level, in the realm of the soul, man experienced a harmony with life akin to what we see in the world of animals. Animals do not calculate, they fulfill the demands of existence from the depths of their being, without specialization or reflection. Where exceptions occur, they only prove the rule. As Oriental civilization spread into Europe, and as individuality awakened more fully, human labor could no longer remain excluded from the social order. the integration of work into life became unavoidable. This question, barely present in Greece, emerged as the great social challenge in Rome. It was instinctively understood. Only by bringing labor into the social whole could man fully experience his personality, his selfhood. With this integration, the face of human society changed. The social organization of Europe appears fundamentally different from that of Asia. To understand the roots of our own social deficiencies today, we must trace the development of individuality in Europe. It is rightly observed that the culture of social order as we know it today really begins with the emergence of modern technology and the division of labor. Modern capitalism, for example, is largely a consequence of this division. Yet the unprejudiced observer, looking at the achievements of ancient Egypt or Babylon, sees that even there, large cities, impressive civilizations were made possible by a division of labor. As I showed yesterday, as early as the 11th century, a form of social organization akin to socialism existed in China. But the surface similarities are not what truly matters. It is the deeper patterns, the way individuality and labor are integrated into society, that shapes the course of civilization itself. In the same way, we must recognize that the division of labor, which today is rightly seen as a central social problem, was already present in earlier epochs of human development. It was, in fact, what made Oriental social orders possible, and these orders, in turn, have left their mark on Europe. In Europe, the division of labor appeared gradually. At first less common, it slowly evolved, repeating patterns seen in earlier civilizations. Yet there is a profound difference. In the East, labor existed within societies where individuality was still dormant. In the modern world, labor arises within societies where individuals are striving to fully awaken their sense of self. The same phenomenon, repeated across ages, takes on an entirely different significance. For the Oriental social order, the goal was to allow man to transcend communal constraints, to advance toward a higher spiritual life, to discover his individuality. The European, in a later age, already possessed a sense of self. His task was the opposite, to integrate individuality into the social order, to bring the fully awakened I into harmony with the collective. Everywhere in Europe we can observe the difficulty of this integration. Once, society constrained individuality. Now, society struggles to accommodate it. This underlying tension still confronts us today. Years ago, when I lectured to audiences of workers, I witnessed this challenge firsthand. People struggled to find a path from a fully developed sense of self into the structure of social life. For example, at a workers' association, a man introduced himself as a cobbler. At first, one might have expected simple thoughts, but what he could not imagine was far more revealing than what he could. He outlined a vision of society that differed from my own, and yet insisted that, as a simple cobbler, he could never occupy a position of authority. Beneath this outlook, however, lay a hidden assumption. He might perfectly well be a minister. This reveals the confusion that arises when one asks, how can the individual I be strengthened within spiritual life and placed into the wider social order? In another instance, someone stated, we do not wish to be foremen. We do not want to manage the factory. We want to remain simple workmen, yet with all our rights. Though understandable, this reflects an attachment to the self, without consideration for the organization of society. Many today may not admit it, but the gap between the experience of self and the demands of social order lies at the root of countless social deficiencies. We have developed the sense of self, the I, but we have not yet connected it with a full understanding of human nature, of a human being both comprehended and self-determining. We see this again in contemporary education. A leading figure once visited the Waldorf school. I personally guided him, explaining our methods and their social significance. I emphasized that education of the spirit and soul must be intimately connected with education of the body. A teacher, I explained, must understand how every action affects the human organism, how memory, or the neglect of it, manifests in the body later in life. We must see how nurturing the soul gradually improves physical ailments. Education, then, is not just intellectual, it is holistic. The teacher must know the unity of body, soul, and spirit in both health and sickness. And the reply I received was this, that to accomplish such teaching, the teacher would also need to be a doctor. Indeed, to a certain extent, this would be desirable. For when we consider the difficulty of integrating the self into our social order, we are reminded once more of civilizations long past, the Orient, where the teacher was also the healer and guide, and Greece, where art itself carried an educative influence. In those times, the art of medicine was inseparably linked to the aspirations of the spirit, for man was instinctively regarded as a unified being, both physical and spiritual. In the treatment of the soul, forces were applied that revealed knowledge for the healing of humanity. It was understood that one must seek to cure the human being by leading him toward true spirituality. To accomplish this, one needed to bring healing forces to bear even on ordinary, healthy life. By understanding these forces thoroughly, one could then determine their application to the sick. Observation of the healthy person became a guide. From it, one learned which forces to employ when confronted with illness. The sick were simply those whose organism had deviated from the balance of everyday life. To know how to restore health in the ordinary state was also to know how to heal the sick. To understand which drink, which substance, revealed the subtle connections between man and nature, was to understand, in a cognitive way, how that same substance could restore vitality when illness arose. This intimate connection of medicine, education, and spiritual development was the aim of the ancient Orient. It survives, subtly transformed in Greek life through art. Here, the goal is similar, that the soul itself should be healed through art. We see this reflected in the word catharsis as applied to Greek tragedy. Originally, it denoted the complete purification of man on entering a new life within the mysteries. Something of that original sense endures. We are reminded, too, that in early Greece, knowledge and medicine were inseparable. Education, and even popular culture, carried this spiritual resonance, something that in a sense sprang from the art of healing. We must examine these phenomena of bygone ages. Only then can we cultivate a strength of soul that allows us, even today, to contemplate social orders with an awareness of the whole human being, body, soul, and spirit. Through this awareness, we can meet our fellow human beings not merely with a strong sense of self, but with a perception of the entirety of humanity. If spiritual science advances in this way, then simply through the mood of soul that emerges, we may discover means to integrate the whole human being and all human beings into the social order, thus overcoming the division between labor and life, as history itself demands. For this is what still challenges us today, the need to integrate labor properly into the social order. It is often thought that labor's value lies solely in the product, that it is crystallized in the article created. Yet for those who look more closely, what truly matters is not simply the act of working, not the devotion of physical strength alone. Value emerges from how work fits into the life of society as a whole. A person may toil with great effort, believing their work deserves reward. Yet if this labor exists within an inadequate social order, it may do more harm than good. We see this in the accumulation of literature, the countless pages printed, the paper manufactured, the presses running tirelessly. And yet, of the vast work performed, only a fraction endures. The rest is pulped once more, vanishing into thin air. Consider, too, the labor lost in the horrors of war. Gradually, we perceive that labor in itself claims no absolute value. Its worth derives from its contribution to the life of society. The great sickness of our age, however, is precisely the lack of this capacity to integrate labor into the social organism, to recognize that all we do ultimately for others. To achieve this, we must learn to integrate our own selves into the community, to extend our awareness so that the needs of others become part of our own experience. We must transpose the I within us into the I of others. Shall we not strive toward new social groupings, formed not by nature, but by the strength and awareness of the human soul? All our social needs spring from the self. People sense what is lacking in the social order, yet what we must cultivate is a deeper understanding of what fellowship in body, soul, and spirit truly means. This is the essence of a social order, what it should bring forth from the human heart. The great struggle over the division of labor today is unlike any before. It arises under the influence of awakened individuality. Associations for production exist, yet participation is often guided not by the role these associations play in society, but by our personal position within them. This is understandable. It is not egotism I criticize, for without a strong sense of self, we could never have achieved freedom, dignity, or spiritual progress. Yet this selfhood must also extend, finding imaginative identification with others. It is not a matter of conquering individualism, but of discovering society within the individual, just as the Orient discovered the individual within society. We can achieve this only through the full development of the soul. In my mystery dramas, I attempted to portray this, how one penetrates the inner experience of humanity's differentiations. Differentiation is necessary in society. Each of us must have our own profession. Yet within the soul, we can experience all that is separate in the social world outside ourselves. When this inner social order is realized, the path from self to society becomes possible. Every aspect of human life, labor, capital, cooperation, unions, can then find its proper place in society. Long ago in the 13th century, man had a bond with his work. Every key and every lock bore the imprint of the maker's individuality. Society was still accepted as a whole, for individuality had not yet fully awakened. Today, individuality has reached its zenith. Yet often the modern worker is distant from the product of their labor, even in the spiritual realm. For work to have meaning, it must take root within us and unite with our selfhood. This can happen only when the life of the soul is cultivated in every direction. Then our interest in the world around us is rekindled. We no longer see objects merely as objects, but as part of a living social organism. We no longer love only the product, but the human being who needs it. All this must be established in the soul before we attempt to understand the particular social deficiencies of our time. Europe today stands at the crossroads, between individuality and community, between the remnants of spiritual traditions from Asia and the awakening of full selfhood. We are only at the beginning of the path toward discovering the proper relationship between the human self and the community. From this understanding, the shortcomings of our age can be seen in their true light. Courage is required. Only then can we judge whether the pessimism of Hermann Grimm is justified, whether Europe faces only decline, or whether humanity, through the latent forces in its soul, is capable of choosing the day of understanding and of witnessing not the death of European civilization, but its rebirth.